Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will show up here in my chat room. And I hope you're having a lovely day. Today, my subject is billed as being human. More specifically, I wanted to continue our conversation about shadow work and really metaphysics in general, but in light of being human. And what do I mean by that? Well, as you remember, in our previous conversations, I've talked about how as long as you're alive, you will continue to put things in your shadow. When you have traumatic or difficult experiences, when there are things that you just can't quite handle consciously, they end up in your shadow. Or if you want to think of it that way, they end up as part of your karma, they end up as energetic blockages. These are all ways of describing the same thing that alienates parts of your energy from the whole. This is part of being human. You would think, if you leave that part of the equation out, that the better you get in metaphysics, the less this will happen. Eventually you'll have no shadow, but that is not how it works. Having a shadow is part of being human. And hello to Kayleen in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kayleen. And Kayleen says Marang Narin, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly. Good morning from Australia. And we had the lovely event of being joined by Kayleen in my Patreon chat room this Monday, and that was just delightful. And thank you for joining us today, Kayleen. But with the shadow, you will always be building it because it's part of being human. It's why we have to keep working with it. Now, I will say there's a point at which it does become something that happens less. There's a point at which, depending on where you're starting from, you'll find your shadow is far smaller than when you began, but you'll never be without it. It's part of being human, and this is true for so many things. And hello to Nikki Dodd in the chat room. And Kayleen says actually the pronunciation is very close. Thank you, Kayleen. Language is one of my things, and but that doesn't mean I always pronounce it correctly. If we get me going on language, we'll have quite the nerdy program for the day. But as humans, no matter how much we study, no matter how much we practice, there are certain things that are always going to happen. We will always make mistakes. We will always forget things. There will always be things we quote, should be doing that we won't be doing because we're human. And we need to remember this as we assess our lives. Last night, for example, I was doing an energetic cleansing on my room. And it dawned on me as I was doing this that I should be doing this far more often, considering things that have happened in this house recently, and probably just in general. But I'm human. I only just now thought of it, and it's not the first time it's been cleansed since the things happened. But it probably wouldn't have been hurting me to do it daily, and maybe I should start doing it daily. But it took me a while to stop and think, the energy here is still quite heavy and it needs to be cleansed. I've been doing this, well, pretty much all of my life, and it's now at this point a long life, and still it took it a while to occur to me. So, if things take a while to occur to you, don't feel bad about that. If you come across the solution to a metaphysical situation or any other situation and realize, oh, I should have thought of that months ago. Well, that's just part of being human. And we need to not beat up on ourselves when we come to that place, but rather do the next right thing. You figured out what maybe you should have done previously, well, do it now. Don't worry about, well, the saying, don't cry over spilled milk. do the next right thing and make the situation better. As humans, we also have a tendency to cry over our spilt milk. We have a tendency to think about all the things we should have done, all the things we wish we would have done. And that is not really usually helpful. Um, I mean, if you're considering how to do things better in the future, that's not really the same thing. But if you're just looking back and saying, oh, I wish I had done X, well, maybe in some other timeline you did, but in this timeline, things are as they are, and you must choose the next thing to do. And hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room who says, all too often. Oh, yeah. And that's part of being human. As humans, we don't always do the right thing. We don't always do the perfect thing. We don't always do the right thing the right way. And this is part of our human journey. It's part of our human experience. And it's a very human thing to beat up on ourselves for being human, but that doesn't help anything. Much better is to look at that next right thing to do and then do it. Part of being in this world is things don't always work properly. They don't necessarily always work the way we expect them to work. They don't necessarily always work the way we want them to work. But that's part of whatever game we're playing. Being able to adjust to that, and being able to still find ways to take advantage of that, it's a big part of what life is. It's never going to be exactly what you want it to be, but you can always make it better. You can always make it more what you want it to be. And that dance between our expectations and what we can make reality into is really what being human is all about. And, I have had the great privilege of watching a lot of things that I cared deeply for actually come to pass. I've also had the experience of watching many things I cared deeply for not come to pass. And I've seen things that appeared to be coming to pass that then blew up. And all of these are part of life. And, it's very easy to say, well, I meant for such and such to be the outcome. And I'm upset that it wasn't. And that's human too. That's fine. It's fine to be upset that things didn't go the way you wanted, but you're still where you're at. And the question is, how do you then get to where you want to be? Yes, it would have been great if you won that lottery 10 years ago and we're sitting on a pile of money. But as in the famous sitcom, that was a dream, not a reality. You are where you are now. How do you get to that place of prosperity from where you are? It's very easy to blame everything around you, and very easy also to blame yourself, and very easy to blame the spirit. But the truth of the matter is, unless you have ended this incarnation, you're not done yet. So find the next right thing to do. And when we talk, and hello to Magical Mermaid in the chat room who says, "Good day, fellow humans." And when you're dealing with other people, you have to remember they too are human. They too are making their mistakes. They too probably wish they'd done certain things differently. And one of the things that I have often found is that the things that I thought were missteps, the things that I thought were wasted time, often turned out to be useful later. I can remember things from my 20s that I asked myself, why did I waste all that time on this? Which in my 30s turned out to be vitally important for me to have known. An example is my training as a commercial artist. I often have spoken of this. I trained to be a commercial artist just in time for the profession of commercial art to cease to exist and be replaced by graphic arts, which is totally different. And the skills of a commercial artist are of very little use to a graphic artist. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. However, a lot of the things I've done in my career, it turned out that that skill as a commercial artist was actually really helpful. Even today, when I work with Corellian Publishing and put together books, a lot of a lot of my knowledge of how to do that comes in part from that training as a commercial artist. And I don't know that I would be equally good at doing that without that skill, without that knowledge and experience. So it wasn't really a wasted period. It just seemed like it for a while. I can think of times where I was dealing with certain people who, um, after the fact, really ceased to be any part of my life, ceased to have any influence on my life. But I can see where the things I learned through them impacted my life for the better later. So I'm a great believer in the idea that we can find good in our experiences to apply to our future, even if they didn't necessarily turn out the way we wanted them to in our past. And a lot of people have described me as being a Pollyanna. And the Pagan has described me as a Pollyanna. Lady Bitterwind has described me as a Pollyanna. Um, and maybe I am. But I always believe in finding that next right thing to do and not obsessing over the last wrong thing that you did. Um, it's not to say that you may not make terrible mistakes. And I'm not saying you should not perhaps regret those. Certainly, if you can make amends for them, you should. But you can't let them bind you and stop you from doing anything good in the future. Um, if you spilled that milk, crying over it will not clean it up, nor will it get you new milk. If you spilled milk, you must first clean it up, and then you go and find a way to get more if you can. Or if you can't, you use something else for what you're going to use the milk for. Um, Magical Mermaid says, I feel like we are redefining ourselves in the new digital age, shifting humanity. I feel just the same way. I feel like we're going through a major spiritual shift at this time. I've talked about how I view the technical evolution that we're going through as having major spiritual components also. That many of the things that we've historically considered part of our spiritual lives are going to be taking on a more physical component through technology, such as many of the things we've traditionally done through meditation in the astral plane. I think we're going to be finding technology helping us to do in the future. And I think we're starting to see that, but in ways that don't always register. I think we're going to see a lot more of it. And I think that is going to change some aspects of how we see ourselves as human. One of the big changes to our sense of humanity was the development of individuality. And a lot of people key that to the development of writing. I tend to think of it more as the development of artistic ability, but both of them certainly brought us a greater sense of individuality. They both gave us ways to represent things, including the past, and to look at the individuals in history in a more individual way than had been the case previously. Before the development of these things, people didn't really look at themselves, or don't appear to have looked at themselves, in the individual way that we do. They looked at themselves rather in terms of their role in society and whether they were living up to the stereotyped version of that role. You can still see this in some of the big religions which haven't moved beyond it, where the idea is that everyone will be exactly the same, following exactly the same roadmap, and it's only a question of how well they embody that roadmap. The idea that they would bring any difference or individuality to it is not part of the equation. But most of humanity has shifted its view to involve a much greater understanding of how every individual can fulfill their place in life in a very individual and different way. Um, I think a lot of what we see with Project 2025 and the political division that we're experiencing throughout the world, and hello to Fred's dimension in the chat room, who says, "Hail to thee, Reverend Don." Well, hail to you, Fred. Um, it's good to see you. But I think that what a lot of the political division that we see has to do with the division between these points of view. Those people who think everything should be a single roadmap and who are frightened of individuality and difference, and those people who understand that every experience is different. And certainly coming from a Corellian point of view, that is one of the primary things that I come back to again and again, that your experience is going to be individual. It will be different. It will be unique to you. It's not going to be exactly what happens for everyone else in a similar point of being. When we do shadow work, we have lots of different techniques for it. Even though I tend to come back to the ones that I find most effective, there are many others, which I've written about in my different works. I talked about the ritual bath, for example. And the pagan says, "And I will be between those 2 points of view." Very good. And that is individual. But I think that everything that we do, we have to be prepared for the fact that we may experience it differently than other people, and we must pay attention to what works in our experience. I've seen people occasionally in the metaphysical world saying, "This is the only way you can do it. If you do anything different, it won't work." And then a couple of places over, there's someone doing it completely differently, and it's working for them. I think that there's an endless variation in how we can do most things. Now, some things, I will grant you, are simply part of physical incarnation, simply part of being human. I don't think anyone is going to find themselves in a position where they never make a mistake, where they never make a bad decision, where they never have shadow issues that need dealing with, where they never have uncertainty about what maybe they should be doing. These are all things that we do all experience. But how do we react to them? Well, people react to them differently. Some people are overcome by them. Some people are shut down by them, and other people overcome them and find ways to deal with them. And Fred's Dimension says, "And now for something completely different, eh?" And yeah, I think life often does do that to us, and often we also often find repeating situations. I was talking the other day about the idea of what's sometimes called the threefold law. And this is the idea that in incarnation, you often will experience things that you're karmically attached to many times. The view that some people take of this is that you'll experience it 3 times and that it means just that, which is a point of view I totally disagree with. I have done more than that in this life with certain karmic situations. And working with past lives, my own and other people's, I find that we often will repeat a situation many times until we finally understand it. But the idea is to try different ways of dealing with it, to try to come to an understanding of it, to try to find the right way to handle it, and not just to repeat it. It is very interesting how different situations can resemble one another because of those karmic ties. early in my life, I found myself in the same romantic relationship with several different people who, in some ways, were very different from one another, and in other ways, were exactly the same situation because it was my karmic situation. And I finally learned that lesson and was able to move on from that. And I think this is something that is also part of being human. It's part of the nature of our incarnation. And Wendy says, and hello, Wendy, if I've not already said hello. Wendy says, I'm not as resilient as I used to be. Tell me about that. I'm not as resilient as I used to be either. Although at another level I can do whatever I need to do. But yeah, I do find I'm not quite as resilient as I was a few years ago. Um, or maybe I should say, I, I, I think I am as resilient as I was, but I think I take it a little differently than I did a few years ago. And one of the things I have to say, you often hear people say, if I could go back in time knowing everything I know, if I could go back knowing everything that I know, there are lots of situations I might have handled differently. But the thing is, I didn't know those things. And I cannot go back and reassess those situations based on things I did not know or did not understand. I mean, I can go back and look at them in terms of how I would handle them if I had to deal with them today, but I can't blame myself for what I did not know then. Um, and I think a lot of people make the mistake of blaming themselves or others for situations that they just did not know better how to handle. Now, Magical Mermaid says there's a spell for that. There is actually. It's in third degree. We talk about how to do healing of past events, and but that's a different thing. But you can go back and do healing for that sort of thing. To some extent, you can go back and change them in a dimensional sort of way. You can certainly change the karmic effect of them. But none of that has to do with blaming yourself for them. In fact, you have to be able to rise above blaming yourself for them to be able to actually heal them. But yes, there is a spell for that. There's a spell for almost everything. And being human, we don't always remember that. But when we take a moment, we can call it back to our mind. I think my primary message for today is that, well, when you ask what time is it, the answer is always the same. It's now. Everything is always the now moment, um, because the past has already happened and the future hasn't happened yet. You are here now. And yes, when we talk about dimensionality and everything else, it becomes more complex. But the ultimate question that matters is, where am I now? What do I do now to make a better future? Not what mistakes did I make in the past? What could I have done? What should I have done differently in the past? What can I do differently now? And Wendy says, would it be forgiving yourself? Well, yes, forgiving yourself is very important. If you're holding something against yourself, forgiving it is a very, very big step, in my opinion. Also, remember that very often we hold things against deity, however we conceive deity. And we need to forgive that too, and realize that things happened for various reasons. And hello to Christine Higginbotham in the chat room. And Christine says, oh, how I love the power of now. Yes, absolutely. We are always here. And, when I put the first degree together, one of the things I did is in was not the table of contents, but it was a discussion of what was in the lessons. And one of the things I did was I put a big X and said, "You are here," which was a way of saying, this is where you are now. These other things are coming up, but this is where you are now. And wherever you are in life, that's where you are. It's like they say, wherever you go, there you are, and wherever you are is now. And the thing about the now moment and the chaos moment are, generally speaking, the same moment. It's the moment in which patterns can be broken and reformed. It's the moment in which whatever you were doing in the past can be let go of and a new future created. And yes, sometimes sometimes it's more complex than just that simple, but that's the idea, that you can always make the changes that will make a better future. And does that mean everything from the past ceases to exist? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that you can always do that next right thing to make a better future. And the next right thing is never complaining about the past, assessing the past, but not complaining about it, but rather finding the wisdom that is there for you. And, I'm certainly not saying that you shouldn't do that. And examining mistakes you made in the past, examining things you might have done better in the past, that's always good. But you don't let it bind you to stop you from the future. You embrace the learning that it has for you. And in my mind, that really is one of the most effective techniques I think that we can employ in being human. That we are always in that now moment from which we can make a better future. So that's my message for you today. And I see we've come toward the end of our half hour, and we need to take a moment for a message from our sponsors. Why? Because we love Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. And at this moment, I am preparing for an art show and auction on May 9th. And I hope to have a great deal of artwork, both original artwork and prints, that will be available in that show. I hope you will join me for that. And I will be talking to you more about that in the future. And for me, one of the big things of my life has been artwork. If you've read many of my books, you'll find they're often heavily illustrated because I love doing that artwork. And I feel that visual representation is often easier to follow than written description. If you've read my first degree, you know that I feel this way about spiritual instruction, that often portraying the ideas through artwork can be more effective than simply describing them. And we were talking earlier about the development of the concept of individuality. And yes, of course, I agree that the development of writing which maintained a record of people's individual accomplishments, is a big part of that. But I also think the development of portraiture in particular did a great deal to create our sense of individuality as well. And Wendy says, I'm a visual learner. And, I tend to be a lot that way myself. To be honest, I'm not the world's best reader, although I've read tremendous numbers of books, but I read them slowly, though I tend to remember them forever. The very first portrait of an individual who can be identified is the prehistoric shaman, sometimes described as Crooked Fox. You can read about her in my coloring book, Great Women of Antiquity, which is full of coloring pictures and biographies of great women from antiquity. But people had started doing portraits as far ago as, I believe she was around 30,000 BC, if I remember correctly. But it was particularly around 5,000 years ago that it became highly developed. And I think that had a lot to do with people's starting to really see themselves as individuals. And Magical Mermaid says, I love David Delamere art. Rest in peace. And absolutely. So anyway, thank you for joining me today. I hope you found it an interesting conversation. And I will see you again tomorrow. And let us close as we always do with our prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in this walk we walk together. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, help us always to find the way to do that next right thing, and not to become bound and mired in our past, but rather to always be able to move forward and to create a new future for ourselves. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. Knowing you're always with us, we thank you for your presence from respect, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and again, I will see you tomorrow.